found an attorney just to begin a research study to determine whether or not the EdChoice system is in fact a violation of the state's constitution. And if so, what might some good claims be? So that study was conducted, and it came back with 5 claims, saying that yes, the EdChoice voucher system does violate the Constitution in 5 different ways. Shortly thereafter, I was approached by a group that included Bill Phillis, and Bill is the director of the Coalition for Equity and Adequacy of Public Education in Ohio, which, if it sounds familiar, Bill's the guy who led the Ohio Supreme Court case that had the funding system declared unconstitutional 26 years ago, the famous DeRolf case. And so Bill reached out, and a few others, and we came together. This is in the early days of COVID. Actually, it was even before Zoom calls. We started this on conference calls. So this group brought in another attorney to do another study. Came back with the same 5 claims. And so we began to pull more and more districts together, and on January 4th, 2022, we filed a lawsuit in Franklin County, and we are suing the state of Ohio, the governor, the legislature, the Department of Education, pretty much you name it. But we're suing for something very, very specific. We are seeking injunctive relief, meaning we are seeking an injunction against the Ohio Department of Education paying EdChoice vouchers. And that's a really important piece, because there are people out there who are saying, well, they'll just ignore you like they did the gerrymandering 4 times. You can't do that. When the state Supreme Court orders the Department of Education to not write these checks, if the Department of Education writes these checks, then the Attorney General and the state auditor have an obligation to seek that money back, because that money is being misspent. It's called a finding for recovery. So the Department of Education will not ignore that. They cannot ignore it. So that's what we're seeking. So that was the brief history before the let's debunk school choice. Let me move backwards. As you see, I've got what to expect from me tonight. This whole idea of vouchers, as you know, is blamed on this idea that there is this thing called school choice. This thing that somehow the money ought to follow the students. That is nonsense. And it doesn't exist anywhere else in taxpayer life, right? It would be like, it's exactly the same thing as saying, I don't really like the public parks, so I'd like a voucher to go to Cedar Point or Six Flags. I don't want my son, my daughter swimming in that public pool, with all those kids. Instead, I'd like a voucher to join the country club. I don't really think that public transportation is for me. I'd like a voucher for Uber. These are all directly correlated ideas. School choice is nonsense, just like it's nonsense that someone would get a voucher to hire an Uber. It is a fallacy that has been normalized through repetition, is what I like to say. It exists nowhere but in people's minds. So, we filed the lawsuit. We're now 2 years in. We've got about 200 school districts from around the state that have joined us. These districts are almost all of the big 8 districts. Columbus is involved. Youngstown, Dayton, Cincinnati, Akron just joined, Toledo. But then we've also got school districts in Appalachian, Ohio. We have Chardon, which is where I'm a public school teacher, is a member of the lawsuit. all over the place. Upper Arlington just joined very recently. So there's not any one demographic. It's really a cross-section of the state that is now participating in the lawsuit. We have been going back and forth with the state, and we've been, doing discovery and calling witnesses. It's interesting to note that of the dozens of subpoenas for information and for testimony, only one of those has been challenged. Matt Huffman, who is the architect of school vouchers in Ohio and the president of the Ohio Senate, challenged his subpoena. And he actually won about half of what he asked for. But he appealed, even after that. One person. So the judge is still hearing his appeal. We're discovering we have a court date in Franklin County. Judge Jaza Page is going to hear the case there. I believe it's either November 2nd or November 1st. The case is likely to last 2 weeks. Whatever the outcome, if they win, if we win, it will be appealed to the appellate court. Whatever the appellate court decides, it will again, at that point, be appealed to the state Supreme Court. There are people who sometimes say, well, it'll die in the state Supreme Court for sure because they're so political. That's not a given at all. This case is really clear. I mean, our claims are rock solid. And if the law is on your side, what you often want is a really conservative court because the letter of the law should matter. Remember, we had a conservative state Supreme Court that slapped down 4 times gerrymandering. Now, it's a different court now, but I will absolutely roll the dice with a conservative court. I would much rather have Judge Stewart join the ranks. Absolutely. Lisa Forbes and Mike Donnelly also. But, I'll go all in with the state Supreme Court the way it is. And I want to point out that the other side doesn't want to get there. And it is clear that they think they've got a losing case because they are dragging their feet at every opportunity. They are slow rolling this. We are full go. Let's go. Let's get into court. Let's get this process moving quickly. Because the law is clear. Ohio's Supreme Court is actually really, really well written and very clearly written. There's not a whole lot to interpret. So we've got 5 claims. Also, it's worth noting that the other side, as you would expect, filed to dismiss all 5 claims when we first filed it. We filed 5 claims. Judge Page let every one of those 5 claims continue. She threw out all of their motions to dismiss. So nobody can say that this is trivia, that this is, a nonsense case. Every one of our claims has merit and is moving forward. So it is a solid case, and our numbers are growing. We are eager to get into court. The reason that did you have a question?
I did.
Yeah.
You mentioned 200 districts. That's roughly.
It's about a third of the districts in the state. There's 611 public school districts in the state, and then also some of them are also the ESCs though. So the number gets a little bigger of potential.
The other question I had was, so hopefully you win.
Mm-hmm.
Is the point of the suit to end vouchers en masse in total in the state of Ohio, or is it to reset back to where it started, where it was you had to be low income,
Yeah, sure.
crappy
So
ratings for your district, and there were other conditions?
the goal of the lawsuit is for the state of Ohio to follow the state's constitution, and the state's constitution, we believe, clearly says no vouchers. And remember, also, I'm the youngest of 7. 6 of us went K through 12 public school, but for one of my sisters, St. Anne's School was the right fit for her. And we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. My father was a college professor at John Carroll. My mom didn't work. But they made it work. And there was a sliding scale. And so my sister was able to go to St. Anne's, first through 8. And so, it's not like there's a whole bunch of new private schools sprouting up in the age of vouchers. Those schools have existed without vouchers for 100 years, practically. Maybe some of them 100 years. So there's a real argument to be said that actually none of this is necessary. And if you look at the expansion of the voucher users in the past year, the explosion of users is the group of people who were attending and paying all along. So we're talking about nearly $1 billion of our tax dollars going to fund these private institutions that are not accountable. They are not transparent. They do not have to answer to Freedom of Information requests. And they tend to be really low performing. The Cincinnati Enquirer did an extensive study a couple of years ago comparing the performance of students at voucher schools, students who use vouchers, to students in the schools that those students would have attended otherwise, their public schools. And the Enquirer found that the overwhelming majority of those students underperform their peers at their local public schools. So they're unaccountable, non-transparent, and underperforming. So I often refer to the voucher lawsuit actually as a taxpayer revolt, because you look at $1 billion. The state and Huffman are arguing that they can fund this, but they've never been able to identify that spot in the Ohio Constitution that directs them to fund this, because it's not there. And we've found 5 places that say that they can't. So the good question, and thank you. So what I'm sort of here tonight, my goal, if you will, is to encourage you to get a little bit more informed about the lawsuit, and then go home to your home school districts and start talking about your district joining the lawsuit. We don't have a whole lot of districts out in this area that are involved at the moment. We've got Chardon is involved. I believe Princeton is involved, but most of your school districts are not currently involved. There's been talk about Willoughby Eastlake coming on board. I know that there's some interest in the mentor schools to come on board, but we could really use help getting the communities to begin talking at board meetings and encouraging the local boards of education to protect taxpayers' money. You know, when you talk about $1 billion, what $1 billion translates to in terms of public education, just dirty math. A teacher in the state of Ohio, when you look at salary and benefits and the whole bit, including supplies and that sort of thing, a teacher is $100,000 a year. $1 billion a year could surge 10,000 teachers into Ohio's public classrooms. That's a giant, giant impact. Now, would that happen? No. But I'm just saying that is really what those dollars could be spent on.
So why are school boards not joining the lawsuit?
Good question. Public education is a really interesting, I don't want to say industry, profession. So at the top, you've got, boards of education who are elected by the community to lead the district. But a board of education actually only employs 2 people. We employ the superintendent and the treasurer or CFO. Those are careers. And we have sometimes, we have superintendents who are always sort of looking for the next job. That's not, I'm not putting them down. That's the career path. You know, you start in a small district, you're looking to get a job at a bigger district. Looking to get a job at a bigger district. And so sometimes I think that superintendents and treasurers are ambivalent because, you know, we live in such a torn apart, fragmented time that they don't want to be seen as a troublemaker or, heaven forbid, a radical. And I think that they're just ambivalent about sort of having their name attached with something like this. But at the end of the day, it's not their decision. It's a decision of the Board of Education. In Cleveland Heights, we had failed 2 levies. Probably everybody here at some point has gone and knocked on doors in support of a local school levy. What we began to hear is, I've heard it before, I understand you're stretching dollars. I understand you're cutting where you can cut. But in our community, because we had told them so much about what vouchers were doing and how vouchers were really what was sending us back to the taxpayers again, our community started asking us, what are you doing to protect our tax dollars? And that's a really important question as school districts have to return to the voters again, is what are you doing to protect our tax dollars? Because I, for one, I don't want a dime of my taxes to go to private institutions. I don't care if they're religious or not. I just don't want my money to be thrown into the dark abyss of the private world. It is to the point where literally they're spending about $1 billion on vouchers, and there is not a piece of evidence that says that 1 cent of that is being spent on education. Are they spending the money on education? Yes. But we as taxpayers don't have a bit of proof. Local school districts are audited every single year. They literally, the state of Ohio sends an auditor in and they actually get set up in an office at our Board of Education for a couple weeks. Nothing of the sort happens with this $1 billion of our tax money going to privates. We just can't afford it. So that's my whole shtick for you. I do encourage you to take a look at the table that I have created for you. I sort of made a guesstimate on some of the districts that may be here tonight. There are things that I think are fascinating. If you look in the center column, voucher values versus public funding. So a voucher is, and this is a typo that I'm embarrassed about. A voucher is for a high school student is $8,407. The Mentor schools. The Mentor schools per pupil state funding, this is our tax dollars being sent to the Mentor schools. Mentor gets $1,552 per pupil. But the state will give a private school $8,407 to educate the same child.
Oh, jeez.
The same child.
How do they come up with that
Justification for that.
There is none. They don't have to justify it. They're refusing to justify it.
So it's just the voucher receiving school says
Yes.
this is what we want.
More is always better.
Oh, of course, but
There's absolutely no explanation or justification for the dollar amount. Yes.
So is it fair to say that 8,000 and some odd dollars that they'd be putting into private school money could be spent on the same pupil but in a public school and they're just choosing not to? Or, I mean, should it just be like at 1,500 across the board? Like, are they inflating that number when it goes over to private school, or?
Well, they're sending the private schools, in the case of Mentor, 5.4 times as much money to educate the same child they're sending
Right.
to.
But I guess the question is like, should like the value that's like on the student equate to that 8,000, or does it equate to 1,500? But they are giving more to private education. Does that?
I understand. Yeah, I think I understand your question. Should it be the same? Should a voucher student get the same should the voucher be the same value that the local that the local schools would get?
Right, like why is that, why is it so much more for the voucher?
I mean, I think you'd have to ask Matt Huffman, but if you want my opinion, it's because public schools are some of the strongest unions in the country. Public school teachers, I think that they want to defund everything that is public. I think that they want to continue to balkanize us and send this group to get this, to live in this little cluster in this group. And I think that this idea of public education as the way that we transmit our democracy onto the next generation, which is the power and promise, I believe, of public education, I think that they don't want any of that. I think it is entirely designed to tear down that which is public in favor of that which is private. Look, vouchers gained their first life. This will surprise no one. They weren't called voucher schools, they were called segregation academies. And they happened immediately after Brown versus Board of Education. And in Virginia, the school district shut down. Public schools shut down instead of integrating. And when they reopened, they had created a voucher system to send white kids to private schools. This is where vouchers began. There's a wonderful book. I see some great books over here. There's a wonderful book called Democracy in Chains by a PhD. His last name's McLean. And she goes into great detail about this. But again, I'll come back to my belief, which is I just want us to follow the state constitution. As an elected official, I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of Ohio.
The other piece of this, though, is that, this per pupil funding amount, that's just the state amount. That doesn't include what's collected through local property taxes,
Correct.
because Mentor is closer to 11,000 or
Yeah.
12,000 a student, which means that public school districts have to fight and keep putting levies on the ballot for that extra money, and these private schools are just getting handed the full amount with no effort, no work. They don't have to pass levies. They don't have to do anything for
And
it.
they've been
It's
raising
just-
tuition. The private schools there was a great ProPublica deep dive into how private schools have been raising tuition as the voucher money has been going up. So, and they're also basically demanding that families
Yep.
apply for the voucher, or basically you're going to have to make up the difference.
Do the private schools take special needs children?
No,
Because that's what I
they're
see
not
coming out
required.
of the elementary school.
They're not required.
Children that require an aid, a piece, special transportation. Does the private school have to take any of those children?
Private schools don't have to take students with special needs. Private schools
That need
can.
their aids and
Right.
Private schools can discriminate based on race. Private schools can discriminate based on sexual orientation. Private schools can discriminate. These are private institutions now receiving $1 billion of our money. Another column that I want to point out is the last column, and I want to explain what this means. So, for instance, let's use somebody else this time. So, the bottom, Willoughby Eastlake. So Willoughby Eastlake gets from the state $2,070 in per pupil funding. If you look over at the vouchers, the column vouchers for fiscal year 23, these are the students who actually likely needed the voucher, right, in order to attend the private school. This was before the floodgates opened. So let's say that just half of those students returned, when we win the lawsuit, let's say that just half of those students returned to the Willoughby schools. So we're going to say 123 is 61 kids. 61 kids. If 61 kids return to the Willoughby Eastlake schools, their per pupil funding would bring $126,000 a year back to the Willoughby Eastlake schools. So those are real dollars that will impact real classrooms in real districts. That's the sort of thing that will extend levies when you start talking about that kind of money coming in. It's a lot of money. So I've got two asks, if you will, down in the bottom right box. Vouchers hurt Ohio. is on social media. So if you're on Facebook, please find Vouchers Hurt Ohio and just like it. So you'll be receiving the feed. But the thing that I think is actually the best, which is if you go to vouchershurtohio.com, you can get more information about the lawsuit, but Bill Phillis sends out a daily email, and it's not long. It actually, the graphic is the back of a school bus, and so he has to trim it down and fit it in this sort of small text box. But it keeps you aware of just the issue, what's happening in Ohio, what's happening outside of Ohio, and what's happening with the lawsuit. So you'll be up to date on the sort of the day-to-day of the issue of vouchers.
So if you win the lawsuit,
Yes.
so the state's gonna have to do a constitutional amendment to change it back the way they want it?
First of all, they absolutely would have done that. Look how they whipped together a terrible amendment that they threw on the ballot last August.
Right.
They'll never do it because they know that it's not a winner for them.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at it, on any given day, only 25% of taxpayers have school-aged children in Ohio. So, as I always say, every levy that passes is such a beautiful, sort of altruistic expression. But 75% of Ohioans are not going to approve of $1 billion a year going into private institutions. They'll never do it, which is why these people have never put it on the ballot. We'd love to put it on the ballot. We just can't afford to.
I have several questions.
Please.
One is, obviously there must be more of you that can be doing these talks, I assume.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking every senior center, every place like that, those are the people particularly that have a problem and should,
Yes.
To have
Fixed
a problem.
income. Yeah.
And they would be ones who would have more clout in terms of contacting school boards instead of the same people that are always arguing about something, whatever it happens
yes,
to
yes.
be. So
Yeah.
I just wonder, is there a speakers bureau that you have that does that? I mean, you obviously during the summer can do things, but in the school year, I assume you can't.
Well, actually, you'd be surprised.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a group of teachers, Lake County retired teachers.
Oh,
I think
fantastic.
that would be a good fit. for
Oh,
the
I would love,
program.
you just set me up.
Okay.
My contact information is right here on this sheet. Please, make that happen. I would love to come. First of all, these are my people. What were your other questions?
Well, the other one was, so I guess is there a speakers bureau of people
Yes.
that could
Yes. Yep.
fan out and do that or be prepared to do that? I mean, you did an excellent job of explaining it in a way that anybody could understand, which is great, but it needs to be more people. who
Yeah,
need to be
no, we've
hearing
got,
it.
so the steering committee of the lawsuit started as 5 people, and now we're up to probably, I'm guessing 50. And so we travel all over the state and we talk to groups large and small. And we're actually, what we've started to do is we've started to create local chapters of Vouchers Hurt Ohio. That's what happened in Upper Arlington. There was a group very similar to the Mentor Facebook group, and they reached out to the lawsuit and they said, we want to learn more, we want to learn more. And so we created a local affiliate within that group, and we created toolkits for them. So I have toolkits if people are interested, so that you can feel more knowledgeable to do things like speak at board meetings and that sort of stuff. So we do quite a bit.
Any other questions for Dan while we have him?
Please, yeah, no, don't be sorry.
How does the voucher program, I guess, apply or not apply to, career tech centers?
So most of career tech centers are public institutions. They're thankfully, they're very often consortiums of multiple school districts just to get efficiency. And so those are public schools. A student is usually enrolled, so a student will be enrolled at Chardon High School where I teach, and he or she will spend half of the day at Auburn Career Center learning how to weld. But they're a Chardon High School student, so they're enrolled at Chardon High School, and so they wouldn't be getting a voucher.
So I guess, does the money then stay with their home school?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And the school districts, all of the participating school districts with Career Tech consortiums, sort of they all pitch in to cover the costs of operating those facilities. Yeah. Some of the best work we do is those Career Tech work. Yeah, Career Tech work.